And as the panel takes a seat, I want to introduce the moderator. He said I work for him, but the reality is, or he said he worked for me. The reality is I work for him, but it's a privilege to introduce Mr. Randy Pestana, who is the Assistant Director of Research and Strategic Initiatives at the Gordon Institute. He teaches in the Honors College and in the Department of Politics and International Relations, and he also serves as the Director of Training and Education for Cybersecurity at FIU. So with that, Mr. Pestana, I turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, I don't think Brian's ever called me Mr. Pestana in his life, so that was the first, so that was unique. Thanks so much for that, Brian. Extremely excited to be here to talk about a topic that is certainly cutting edge, but certainly a topic that showcases a lot of the vulnerabilities facing our hemisphere, just the world, right, in cybersecurity, but especially our hemisphere in a lot of our partner nations down in Latin America and the Caribbean. So really excited to moderate this discussion looking at the impacts and threats associated with cybersecurity in the Americas. And I have the privilege of moderating a fantastic collection of cybersecurity experts and practitioners for this discussion. I will introduce them in the order in which they will speak, and then I will ask a relatively broad set of questions to which they will then respond for 5 to 7 minutes worth of remarks, and then we'll go into a discussion. We'll take questions, obviously, from the online and the in-person audience, so I encourage you to engage. So speaking first is a very dear friend of mine, Ms. Kerry-Ann Barrett, who is the Cybersecurity Program Manager at the Cybersecurity Program at the Organization of American States, and in her capacity offers technical assistance to member states in the development and implementation of their national cyber strategies. Kerry-Ann, thanks for being here. Speaking next to her is Arturo Cabanas, and he's currently Security Assurance Leader at Amazon Web Services and for the public sector in Latin America. And in this capacity, again, is responsible for creating programs that help Latin American governments, partners, and customers regulate data and workloads in the cloud. And last but certainly not least, coming all the way, I think you came for the weather, Bob, certainly. So Bob Gordon is the Executive Director of the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange, and over his career worked for, I think, pretty much every security institution in the Canadian government, certainly, and then actually played a key role in building out Canada's first cybersecurity strategy, and spent many time working across the hemisphere. So thank you for joining us. So big question. And it's a two-part question. The first one is really based on your looking at the region, looking at the hemisphere, what are the key vulnerabilities facing our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean? That's the problem question. The second one is, what is some of the work you're doing or some of the work you're seeing that's actually providing actionable solutions across the hemisphere to protect against said cybersecurity vulnerability? So Kerry-Ann, if I can start with you.
Thanks for that, and thanks FIU for having us again. It's been a really good partnership that we've had over the years, and we continue to enjoy it. I think you'll see me glancing down a bit because I think it's really important to ensure that the accuracy of how we depict or share the information that we've been seeing is very important. Latin America, I think since pre-pandemic, so if you go all the way back to 2017, we're seeing many attacks. Then the pandemic hit, and then automatically many of our governments were forced to just go online with no preparation, go online with a hesitation that they already had to do e-government. Many of them may have had, for example, a Microsoft enterprise license, and that was as technology savvy as they got. Then being forced to, one, implement systems related to COVID-19, tracking personal information, being able to think about data protection for all that data that they had. And then on top of that, students, health services, everything had to go online automatically. What we think that it actually led to is we've been seeing almost $90 billion in loss across the region. And in seeing that, that is investment that we believe could have been put into the region for development instead of trying to actually address cyber threats that we're seeing. Additionally, there's been a sharp increase against critical infrastructure systems, and almost none of our member states have been immune to these attacks. In particular, a lot of the countries in the region, based on the OAS IDB report all the way back in 2020, shows that of the 32 countries that we actually did the surveys with, only 7 of them had a critical infrastructure policy or protection plan in place. With that said, the region has not been immune to seeing supply chains being impacted. A lot of the times, we speak about the US and the experience that has happened with solar winds or with the supply chain for the COVID. But at the end of the day, a lot of the things that are happening globally are impacting on supply chain within our countries. And if it is that we have not put in place the necessity to track, to mitigate, to respond to the resources needed, it's ended up being a bit down. Another thing I just wanted to point to, just to run through some stats, because I think persons believe that the Caribbean countries are not as vulnerable as maybe some of our more mature Latin American countries. Just last month in April, as an example, Trinidad and Tobago faced a massive cyber attack of one of the largest suppliers that runs insurance, it runs cars, it runs supermarkets. They had a point of sale attack. In the same month, Aeropost, which is based in Doral here and has many offices all throughout the Caribbean, faced a huge data breach with millions of data sets being lost. In terms of what we're doing, thinking about the market of the Latin American for cybersecurity, it's valued at almost 12.8 billion. And in seeing that, a lot of donors, persons who are from the World Bank, the EU, have been doing significant investments in the region. A lot of it has been focused around what we call cybersecurity capacity building. But at the same time, the World Bank has given, for example, the OECS millions to be invested in digital transformation projects. And what we're thinking about is what is the balance that we can actually do to not only digitize the economies that need to be digitized, but also put the protections in place. Just one quick example from the OAS, so at least you'd know some of the things that we're doing specifically. We have something that's called the CCTX Americas Network. Right now, we have over 162 professionals online, almost 24 what we call computer incident response teams that are connected. And what we've been providing is 24/7 threat intelligence to governments in terms of what attacks are happening to their government portals. Many of it we're tracking seems to be more ransomware, spear phishing that's happening on those networks. And we've been trying to work together to share best practices, for example, with an EU project called Cyber for Dev. I'll stop there for now because I know you always have more questions, so I'll reserve some of the other information for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was a dig or not, but I'll take it. Duda, if I can turn it to you, same question.
Sure. Thank you, Randy. Well, in the same line as Kerry-Ann mentioned, COVID-19 show us the dependency we are on technology, but mainly in infrastructure, critical infrastructure, things such as supply chain for food, transportation, education activities, government processes, even water, energy. And as mentioned by Kerry-Ann, this research the OAS did, where they found out that only 7 of 30 countries have critical infrastructure protection. That means that there is a huge gap on protecting this type of vital infrastructure. Things like what happened at mid-April with Costa Rica, when Ministry of Finance got attacked, and now more than 27 institutions in Costa Rica has been attacked by the same hackers of Russia. This has hindered not only the normal operation of tax collection, but also foreign trade of Costa Rica. So there's a huge gap that still need to be filled with best practices, with technology, with awareness and culture. So that's the issue we have seen in the past years. Now, things that we have been doing as Amazon Web Services, we have been building cybersecurity capacity through workshops, white papers, collaboration with the OAS, and for example, Cyber Women Challenge. We have released white papers on ransomware and data classification, data protection, webinars also on ransomware. We try to provide education to the user level, to the government level, any level. And the recommendations we always try to give are 5 pillars. The first one is promote the culture of cybersecurity at all levels. It's important that the end user, the leaders in the companies and understands the importance of providing good cybersecurity in all institutions, especially in vulnerable sectors, elderly children, small and medium enterprise as well. Another good practice that we are seeing is promoting increasing the priority of national strategy regulations in countries. A country cannot protect infrastructure if they don't understand how to identify the infrastructure, how to protect it, how to respond to an attack. That's why building a policy around cybersecurity is essential for our countries. And another example of the 5 pillars we promote is also training on the deficit of professionals that there is in the region. There's estimate, I think it's 700,000 deficit on professionals that we have in the region. So by providing training, free training, accelerate training, improving the curriculum of the university, that's another way we can reduce this gap. And lastly, I would say that also harmonizing the regulations is very important. One of the things that we as a private company try to do is to scale all our services. And by having the same regulations, it helps us to make it easier to reach all of the countries on the region. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arturo. Bob.
And the first thing we're going to find is the technology is not going to be completely helpful this afternoon as this keeps falling off. So having said that, and we'll get back to it, I think we're becoming increasingly familiar with the cyber threat environment. I mean, headlines on almost a daily basis are broadcasting who was the most recent victim, how much personal information or intellectual property was stolen, and how big was the ransom demand. Now, I'm going to take us down from the level of talking about this at the state level, and I'm going to focus my remarks on the victims and what led them to be vulnerable from the standpoint of then starting to think about what additional kinds of solutions might we be able to bring to the problem. When thinking about cyber victims, attention is usually focuses on critical infrastructure sectors, things like finance, energy, and telecommunications. From the attacker's perspective, the reason to go after these companies is pretty obvious. These sectors are critical to the economy, and consequently, they're under pressure to restore operational capability just as quickly as possible. Generally, these victims are large organizations, and the belief is that they've got financial resources to pay whatever kind of ransom demand there is. Their data can include personal information and intellectual property. And these 3 sectors generally have the ability to defend themselves. I suggest that more attention needs to be paid and given to small and medium-sized businesses. SMBs are the critical component of the economies across all of the Americas. The statistics are fairly consistent. SMBs constitute about 99% of all the businesses, and they're amongst the strongest drivers of economic development and innovation. Despite their economic importance, SMBs tend to underestimate their cyber risk. Some of this is due to a lack of awareness on what the cyber threat is against them. Frequently, it's also due to the belief that as an SMB, they've got nothing that will be of interest to cyber attackers. They don't have trade secrets or intellectual property or extensive financial assets that are worth stealing. These assumptions are false. First, all businesses are in the data business regardless of how big a company is or what it does. Data can be comprised of financial and employee records, lists of customers and suppliers, and inventory and product shipment. A Canadian study that was released last week revealed that in 2021, 91% of SMBs invested in technology. Connecting this technology to the internet makes it accessible to cyber attackers. Second, the information held by SMBs is of value to them. And because it's of value, it's worthwhile for an attacker to deny the SMB access to that data. The attacker has no interest in the worth of the data, just that it's of value to the victim. Consequently, SMBs are victims of cyber attacks. In Canada, 18% have been affected by a cyber attack or data breach in the last 2 years. 60% of them don't have any insurance to help them recover from an attack that occurs, and 44% do not have any defenses against a cyber attack. The impact is significant. In 2021, the resulting cost of the operation of small business amounted to about $49,000 per business. That's a lot of money for a small company. We've also been living through a period of rapid business transformation. The most visible was the shift to working from home. And lots has been written about the increased cyber risk as we move from the fortress walls of the office to the decentralized environment of kitchen tables. IT groups responded by adapting the security procedures to deal with this new reality. At the same time, business units have been under pressure to deliver products and services to customers in different ways. Office buildings and stores are no longer the only point of interaction with customers. IT groups need to engage their business counterparts in a different kind of interaction. IT must find ways to provide new methods for delivering these products and services. In addition to being technical experts, IT leaders must understand the business. They must talk the language and become enablers of transformation. Sometimes that's going to mean taking a higher level of risk than previously would have been considered acceptable. It requires a different level of engagement between providers of cybersecurity and the providers of business services. And this is happening quickly. Cybersecurity vulnerabilities are also being experienced in other areas undergoing change. Deployment of things like Internet of Things, and the linkage of information technology and operational technology. Adoption of these risks introducing new cyber vulnerabilities. IoT devices are becoming widely deployed, and up until recently, with little or no attention being paid to reducing the risk or the likelihood that the attackers will use this as an entry point into victims' networks. Operational technology is being connected to the internet and subsequently to corporate networks. Unfortunately, much of the legacy operational technology cannot be reconfigured to accommodate the cybersecurity requirements of connecting devices to the internet. Consequently, an attack into the corporate networks has the potential of migrating into the operational networks, which will bring business disruption guaranteed. And we talk about what's happening and what could be going on and what's positive out of that. So let me pull this back up to the state level. The 2020 report, Cyber Risk, Progress and the Way Forward in Latin America and the Caribbean, produced by the Inter-American Development Bank and the OAS, highlights areas of progress. For example, the development of national cybersecurity strategies, and my colleagues have spoken about that. However, there's a lot more needs to be done. I'm going to comment on a couple of initiatives in Canada, which link to those being explored in Latin America and the Caribbean. The cybersecurity capacity model for nation states sets out 5 dimensions to establish the level of maturity. Dimension 1 lists the requirement for a national cybersecurity strategy. Canada, like 12 Latin American and Caribbean countries, has a strategy like that. But the threat is continuing to evolve, as is technology. Therefore, these strategies have got to be kept current. Governments also need to demonstrate the importance of cybersecurity and build awareness in the public and business communities. Updating cybersecurity strategies is one really good method to achieve that goal. The Prime Minister of Canada did that in his recent mandate letters sent to his cabinet ministers, where he directs them to continue to advance the National Cybersecurity Action Plan and develop and implement a renewed cybersecurity strategy. Now, that process is going to raise awareness of cyber issues, as the review is going to involve a lot of consultation with a wide range of public and private stakeholders. Second, I think it was encouraging to see 30 nations come together last fall to discuss steps on how do we go after ransomware attacks. 3 countries from Latin America and Caribbean participated. The ministers and the representatives discussed how to reduce ransomware attacks. One example is going after the attacker's financial motivation. In essence, how do we disrupt the ransomware business model? And I think I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to questions.
Thanks so much for that. And thanks for everyone's comments. A lot of there to digest. So we'll hit. Want to reaffirm some of the key areas. Kerry-Ann talked about that $90 billion in loss that can go towards Latin American investment. Right? There's no shortage of need across the region. So thinking about the impacts of COVID, there's so much there to unpack. Right? You have the financial considerations. You have the healthcare considerations. You got satellite communications technologies. You have certainly the general cyber awareness and cyber hygiene aspects. Where do countries even start? If you're a country developing or expanding or modifying your strategy, because a lot of these countries have strategies, but they don't have the additional steps associated with it. And I'll start first with Arturo. Where do you go? when you have limited amounts of resources and limited amount of international investments in this space, where do you begin?
Right. So what we said to the countries is don't start building from zero. There are already frameworks and methodologies that they can start using. And one is the cybersecurity maturity model, which we believe builds the foundation for any country to start their cybersecurity strategy, or if they already have it, to make it even better. So I would start with that.
Bob?
I think the building of awareness is a huge piece of it. A lot of the public, I mean, we talk about cybersecurity because we understand it, we get it, we know it's a problem. But I'm still amazed with the number of businesses I talk to that think, cybersecurity's got nothing to do with me. And they're wrong. It's got to do with everything. I mean, as I listened to Statistics Canada, who did some really good reporting a couple of years ago, and they said only 20% of businesses got hit by a cyber attack. I said, okay, let me paint this picture for you. You walk down Bank Street, many of you know Ottawa, that's the main drag going south. Means every fifth business you walk by got hit by a cyber attack. If that was any other crime, we'd be out parading in the streets and demanding politicians do something about it. But we've got to get out there and start to tell people that this affects them, because then they can start doing simple things that don't actually cost a lot of money. The perception is that all of this costs money, and some of it does. But a lot of it is just starting to do basics. But you've got to know that you've got to start doing something. And I think that awareness piece is something that governments are really good at doing. They can do it effectively. They know how to deliver that messaging. It's not costly, but it starts the ball going, because it starts to get companies to start to think about this, that I want to be thinking about it. And once you start thinking about it, then you can start to look at, okay, what are you going to do?
What do you think, Kerry-Ann?
For me, I think it's really the multi-stakeholder dialogue that needs to happen. One of the things that's key to addressing cyber threats like this, especially when you think about ransomware, awareness is good, doing models are good, but also information sharing is key. And information sharing can't happen unless the multi-stakeholder community actually knows how to speak to each other. When we speak multi-stakeholder, we're talking academia, who actually is every day in doing threat models, understanding what's happening, to private sector, who has the technology and the know-how, and to government that has the wherewithal to actually put legislation in place. Just one quick example, coming out of the Conti attack in Costa Rica, one of the positives that we saw come out of it is that the government actually had a Directive 133. And Directive 133 actually says you need to share data with the CERT. You can't be that you have an attack and the CERT, which is supposed to be your first point of defense, has no clue what's happening. So if ever you can get a positive out of something that is still devastating for our country, a directive came out of that, and that directive is, as a part of it, information sharing at the core.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important example. And again, the Costa Rica example is something that we've been tracking closely because it's still ongoing, right? I think Reuters reported that it was potentially a Russian-supported group, and the impacts of it was targeted towards removing the president from office. That's certainly, I don't think anyone believes that's going to happen, right? But it's costing them, I think they just upped the ante, a $20 million ransom, which doesn't sound like a lot in the US context, but in Latin American context, it's astronomical. But thinking about that information sharing, I think back to the financial sector, because I think if you're looking for a model, the financial sector does a really good job of this. If you look at, I think, Morgan Stanley and all the major banks in New York, they have information communication sharing agreements across that. Do we have that kind of exchange? Do we have that kind of methodology to be able to communicate this information? And one, how effective are we if we do have it? So what are you seeing in the region, Kerry-Ann?
In the region, surprisingly, when we go in to speak with these multi-stakeholder financial sector in almost all our member states have the information sharing down pat. Many of it is attributed to the fact that it's a sector that you don't want a run on the banks. You don't want a run on everyone pulling their money out because of fear. So what has happened is many of them has also benefited because in the region, some of our banks are overseas. Some of the good practices, best practices that came from Canada, from the US for the banks that are actually in our member states, they actually have implemented it. But the financial sector, surprisingly, every single consultation we've done, they've been the ones that have come. Belize, as an example, when we did our national cybersecurity strategy for them, Central Bank was a part of the working group every single day. Costa Rica, Financial Ministry of Finance was there. The financial, we could actually go to the chambers of commerce. They were there as well. So it's actually surprisingly one of the sectors in the region that has figured out information sharing.
No, thank you. Arturo, it's interesting, and we'll go, I know, Bob, you want to jump into the conversation as well. From an industry perspective, though, right? We have the government's perspective, we have the communications bodies, but what role can industry play? And then, Bob, from your experience, what role have you utilized industry, right? You know, I know you've played both hats, both private sector and government. What role can industry play to be able to support that information sharing and protection?
Industry is key because we receive attacks globally. So the information that we receive can help to prevent attacks in specific countries. So one of the things that we do is we publish reports on recent attacks that we received in another region that can help prevent for a specific country. Also, if we by any chance detect or that one of the countries has a specific vulnerability, we will also share that proactively. But again, I think it could be better. I think there is such a, as an industry, I think we can become more proactively. Right now, we are doing it separately. Maybe in the future, there could be an organization overseas all this information sharing between the industry to the governments.
Up. You're talking to a converted collaborationist. That's what my organization does. So we have organizations, all sizes, all sectors, getting together, sharing best practices, sharing threat information. And one of the things that comes out of it, again, looking at the cost for small companies, and one of the challenges we've all got is the shortage of talent. It's a way for smaller companies to benefit from what other people are experiencing. So you don't have to go through every one of these steps for the first time. Somebody else has done it, so you can benefit from it, and then you can move along to try to solve the problem. It's really effective. I remember when we were getting our organization set up, a group of chief executive officers got together and said, cybersecurity is not a competitive issue. We should all understand what the risk is, what we're facing, and we should work together on that. We can then compete on products that we develop out of that. But this basic understanding, it's for everybody's benefit. As you're saying, if the financial sector goes down as a result, that's going to affect everybody. So it's in the bank's interest to make sure that it goes on. But it's also an opportunity for businesses. We talk about supply chain. So it's an opportunity for companies to engage the supply chain, because as I have a big manufacturing company that belongs to us. I said, okay, we can shut you down tomorrow morning. I said, oh, you can't. We got the best security. Yeah, okay. You know that little trucking company that brings the raw products in the morning, takes the finished goods out? You're going to have a perfect manufacturing plant with nothing coming in and nothing going out, because we shut down that little trucking company because they've got zero security. So what are you doing to help them stay cyber secure? And that you can play that out in any business, in any country, or across country borders. And we talk about supply chain. It was talked about in several of the panels. And this is one way where companies and countries can get together and start to harden up, make more resilient those cyber, the supply chain area. Kerry-Ann?
I think it's important to highlight as well that private sector partnering with regional organization is a big win for everyone, because one, regional organizations actually have knowledge or specific knowledge of each country. We have several examples that's worked really well, and it's not for profit. For example, Amazon Web Services, we have an agreement with them that it's not even about the money, it's about the fact that we can go into countries together and offer capacity building. We have the same with Cisco, where Cisco is focused on innovation councils in several countries in the region to come up with innovative ideas for the country. We also have one with City Foundation, and City Foundation is focused on creating a digital career for disadvantaged youth in certain countries within the Latin American region. So I think on top of just bringing their knowledge, know-how, it's actually figuring out how do we meet the needs of the region based on the knowledge that is available from regional bodies.
Yeah, you know what's interesting to me? There seems to be kind of a forthcoming paradox that we're getting into, right? We talk about connectivity across the region, the access to broadband, and it was no more prevalent than we saw during the COVID pandemic, right? Where you had inherently a lost generation, if you will, right? A lot of folks that didn't have broadband connectivity, couldn't access mobile virtual classes, couldn't get their education, and many countries, right, revert to gang or other activities. So as you increase connectivity, you're going to increase vulnerabilities in the threat landscape associated within the region. It's difficult to manage. So how do you get in front of it? And what are we doing right now in your respective capacities to get in front of that increased connectivity that we know over the next 5 to 10 years is going to be there. So I don't know if I can.
Yeah, sure. So let me explain first how the security and the cloud works, because I think I can answer with that. So for cloud service providers such as Amazon, we provide the exact same security for any customer. So that means that a customer, for example, in Germany, and a bank in Germany requires us to have the best security will be the same as someone who's going to upload the photos of the vacations tomorrow. So it's the same exact security. So by having these new customers coming to services like ours, like us, they will have the exact same standards that we comply around the world. So one of the things that we tell them is, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just use these services. I will provide it with you with these services. So the pandemic, one of the things that we had is many countries that were, they didn't want it to come to cloud before. Now they don't want to go out of the cloud because now they see, well, I'm more protected than when I had my on-prem services. So that's how we are helping, bringing these new institutions to the digitalization era.
Is there pushback at all?
Not at all.
Not at all?
I think this is where technology has a huge role to play, and companies are jumping forward to help in a lot of ways, both in terms of obviously making money, because if companies aren't making money, they're out of business. So please make lots of money. But I also like the fact that they're also participating in solving the problem. You see them volunteering to do things coming forward. So it isn't just there's a corporate welfare side of it where they're contributing to the general welfare of what's going on. And it's been really encouraging to see, companies across the spectrum standing up and saying, okay, let's work together on this. There's actual formal organizations being created where companies are now sharing information, sharing best practices, which then can be distributed elsewhere. Amazon's been a part of a lot of those. And I applaud that because I think that's the way to go. So it starts to help individuals and governments because industry's got that technical understanding. And quite frankly, as somebody who's in government for a long time, industry's going to do this a lot faster than the government is, so just get out of the way and let industry go forward and do it. And then have government coming along and doing some of those enabling kinds of things that will help them be able to do it and actually then disperse that in areas that either economically may not be viable for a company to do. So I think that's where then the partnership starts to come into play. How do you get that technology piece going and government opportunity, direction, enablement to work along with it? OAS has been doing that for years. You've mastered the art of doing that.
Yeah, so I think that P3, that public-private partnership model and stuff like that. But what mechanisms are there? Obviously, the OAS is a huge mechanism, be able to bring people together. But thinking it from an industry perspective, certainly you got to make money. And one of the things I heard when I travel the region is, yeah, it's great that you're here. It's great you want to give us technology. It's great you want to, help us. But you just want to sell us a bunch of stuff too, right? So how do you balance or how do you communicate that, hey, this industry is here to help? It's not just about the money. And is there not trepidation on the part of citizens across the region to say, wait a second, you might have alternative, motivations?
I think one of the key things is that with the development community and all the loans that are going out, they're starting to layer in security as one of the key components. And in order for governments to actually fulfill that, they need industry as well. One of the other things that industry can't do is that industry is not there to lose. So if it is that governments haven't invested in cybersecurity, whether it be that they're giving it as a volunteer service to the governments or not, it actually comes back to them. So many of the partners that we work with, it's very agnostic. Every time we go in to provide a service, for example, Cisco has this free academic school, AWS has AWS Educate, Microsoft has a school. All of these things recognize that, one, we have to fill the gap for the professionals. So all those free services help governments in the end. But I think it's just the agnostic nature. As Bob says, cybersecurity, I wrote it down. It's not a competition. And I think that's a key statement.
Yeah, I want to switch direction a little bit. And it's based on an anecdote from experience when I was in Colombia. We were there for the Western Hemisphere Defense Conference focused on cybersecurity. And one of the things that was kind of that weird aha moment for me, I was going to talk about, workforce development training. They had a huge sign at the registration with a QR code with Wi-Fi network password. you had military representatives from at least 25 different countries, senior, these are, colonels and above, at the conference, opening up a unsecured network. It opened up my mind to say, we have a problem here, right? This is protecting our security infrastructure, the military and things like that. How do we move past that with a lot of these countries and institutions that frankly haven't utilized technology the way we're utilizing today? Are there anything that you see that's changing that? Are we seeing a shift maybe because of COVID? What do you think, Bob?
I think when we start to look at cybersecurity, there's three pillars we want to look at. One is technology. Second are policies and procedures. The third and the critical part is the people side of it. And if you're an attacker, I don't care which one of those three doors you're going to leave open, I'm just going to come through it. And a lot of our activity in the past has always focused on the technology. We said, okay, the cone heads over in the corner, the techies, they're going to solve this problem. Well, yeah, okay, they have a huge part of it, but we've got to be looking at those other pieces. And that's where we come down to the policies and the people side of it you're talking about, Randy. And I think we've got to start paying attention to that. So it's basically educating people as to what's going on, what are the problems, what can they be doing themselves. It's putting in place the policies and procedures so you don't get a QR code that's up at a piece. And that's policy and procedure. That's not a technology issue. That's going to be a technology attack opportunity, but that's a different problem. And I think governments and civil society, you've got to start looking at those three pieces and start looking and paying attention to those. It goes into, what are we doing and they talk about going into the kindergarten level and starting to talk about, young children about, talk about cyber safety for them and cybersecurity, those sorts of things, and bring them along so that eventually we're not having to worry about QR codes in lobbies, but that'll come along. And then the technology folks are going to be coming along and at the same time bringing and solving and cutting off some of those, real easy attacks coming through, and then making sure that the civil society piece is doing their part. Otherwise, you're leaving one of the doors open. Attackers don't care which door.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that oftentimes I think countries overlook, they're focused on the protection of critical infrastructure, that intersection between security and privacy, where the security of the critical infrastructure is important, the privacy of civil society otherwise, less so, that, that privacy problem. Arturo, you spent, I think, a decade in Mexico,
10
right?
years in Mexico.
10 years in Mexico, right? Did you see some of this, or did you see some evolution, particularly on the way, the Mexican government or citizenry adapted as it evolved technology?
Yes, and let me share one of the things that I think it helped and is still helping. We created with the Industry Association of Mexico a program called Like Inteligente or Intelligent Like, where we provide awareness campaigns to the end user, the children, fathers, small and medium business. We show them how to read an email, understand if that's something that's spam, something that could be, ransomware, etc. And we have seen more and more throughout the years how this type of campaigns have helped the society. And now when I go to talk with the government, it resounds, they understand, they say, hey, this is something that we are hearing more and more people talking about cybersecurity. So these awareness campaigns are helping. Now, the government, of course, they need to build their guardrails, they need to build the regulation, they need to keep up with the technology. That's something that we also try to push them and help them through organizations such as OAS.
Kerry-Ann, what have you seen?
I think for me, it's awareness and education at the end of the day. The person who's behind the screen and behind the keyboard is the key point to error. Like that's the one way in order for things to happen. And I think there's not enough awareness in the region. And the awareness is not just a billboard. It's thinking about, I always use the example when we usually have health campaigns. You walk in for COVID and signs were everywhere. Wash your hands, use sanitizer, use everything. And if you relate several attacks to like a pandemic, recognizing that's something that's spread all over, it's not just a one-day thing. Please change your password at the end. It's something that has to be every single day, because every single day you have persons coming onto the system, you have persons joining the internet, you have new technologies, new software. So I think for me, the bottom line is that you can't get around the awareness piece.
Yeah, so I know in the region there was a big effort, the Stop, Think, Connect effort, right? And this was intended to kind of just do that.
And that lasted for 2 years, and
yeah.
that was it.
Again, I recall one of the big issues there was prioritization of efforts and the resources associated with campaigns like that. I know one of the initiatives that we're looking at and working on is understanding what the educational avenues and outreach and things are. It'd be interesting to see, and I'd love your thoughts on this, what countries can do from with the limited resource environment, what we can do in terms of building that digital citizenship, starting with early youth, but then evolving. Is it a COVID-like campaign of communication? Is it an investment or partnership with industry? Is it an external state actor, right, that's being able to support like Canada does, particularly in the ICT efforts? So what does that look like? What do you think, Bob? Sorry.
I was going to say yes to all of the above. And I say that only a little bit jokingly, because I think we take pieces of all of that. So you start to do, you know, at a capacity level, what are some of the incremental things that you can do? But start to bite some of those things off. Start to enable industry to do what it can do to incentivize industry to take on perhaps a different role than what it might otherwise be doing. You can start to reach out into academia and start to incentivize academia to set up programs for education or that skills development, the talent development going through. So I think there's things like that on the one side. The other thing I think governments can do, and again, this is, you know, mindful that stuff gets costly, but the going after the ransomware attacks that came up, I was thrilled by that the meeting held in Washington last fall. I mean, there's a way. This is not a big technology issue. You don't need lots of technical folks to do that. This is real simple, basic chasing fraud and going after criminals the way we've gone after criminals before. We can all do this. Every country. You don't need to do legislation to be able to do this. We can go after and do that. And what that does, it starts to send a message both to the attacker, but more importantly to the public, that the government takes this seriously. The governments are actually doing something about it, and therefore it gets back down to, are you reporting in the crime? Because now governments, you're going to see government doing something. So government starts to realize, oh, wow, there are a lot of attacks going on, and we should do something. So it gives the ammunition to the politician to spend time at it, to make sure government resources are being put into the right kinds of places, whether that be law enforcement, the prosecutorial process. So again, these are fairly easy steps. No big laws needed, no huge amounts of dollars going in. We can all start to do that. And I think countries are starting to do it. They're starting to build that awareness. And I was struck by the Congresswoman's comments about some of the topics coming up, the whole digital agenda coming up. That's exactly what this is all about. That's what cybersecurity is enabling that digital agenda. It's that underpiece, because if we don't do that, we're going to undercut the capacity, the opportunities that bringing on that digital agenda is actually going to do.
Yeah, to Bob's point, one of the key themes of the Summit of the Americas is digital governance and be able to support partner nations as they develop their digital governance strategies. Duno, do you want to give it?
I think the only thing that I can add on top of what Bob said is governments should start using online tools. If they want to scale the message, they cannot continue with the standard traditional method. They should embrace technology to spread this knowledge.
Fantastic. Kerry-Ann?
I think from my perspective, one of the things governments keep complaining about is that they don't have enough finances for human resources. One of the things that we've been trying to do with our member states, and I'll use the World Bank Digital Transformation Project, is speaking to all of the countries who benefited from that to say, hey, the budget that you have invested in the digital assets is one aspect, but ensure that for the next 2 years, you have budget for salaries.
Yeah.
Like think about the loans that you're getting, think about all the monies that are coming into your country and focus on human resources. And if they can do that, at least they'll be guaranteed with working with the private sector for transfer of knowledge, which is something that's key to ensure that any products that they purchase as a result of these projects, there's some component layered into the project for knowledge transfer.
I think that's extremely important. Yeah. Want to shift gears a little bit more controversial, right? Looking at the role of China and Russia in the region. We had the discussion earlier with Juan Gonzalez, and I think David Mercosal Powell also raised it. Is the role of the Chinese role, particularly in providing technology and data security and information security of citizens, right, over the long term. What do you see in terms of, that China vis-a-vis relationship with the United States in the region in terms of supporting those increased technologies for protection and potential vulnerabilities associated with transitioning towards like the Chinese technologies?
I mean, throughout the region, I think as far back as I could probably say as far back as 2003, there's been investments in China in the Caribbean more specifically, and then in Latin America as well. A lot of it has been based on infrastructure initially. If there's conversations being had about technology in relation to donations that might be given in, and many of our governments over the years, I think caught on eventually that some of the technology that they were getting being donated is something that they had to look into. But how is it that the US is probably getting involved for us? We have been working with the government generally to see how we can improve the ability of the member states to think about the technology that they're investing in, whether it be 5G technology or just computers, raw, like as basic as computers. And I think many of them have figured it out on their own. And I think it's not a role of even the OAS to say to them, do this or not do this. Our role has been to build your capacity so wherever the threat comes from, you're able to figure it out all on your own as a government.
Arturo?
Yeah. So of course we cannot tell our customers what infrastructure to use, but what we tell them is to look what is behind the infrastructure, what type of standards they comply, what security controls they use. To take a look at the customer agreements. Are they going to continue to be the owners of the data? Are the companies going to comply with your data protection law? So all the things is something that they need to consider besides price, but we cannot do more than just telling them that.
Yeah, my colleagues have made some really good points here. I guess the only other thing I could offer is one of the things we could be doing is incentivizing other companies to go in to offer competing services. Because quite frankly, I think in Canadian companies, we haven't been selling a lot of technology in Latin or South America. We got some great technology. We're just lousy at marketing it. And I think that's where the government can get in and come through and start to say, okay, here's an alternative. Here's why this and here's the strengths and weaknesses of what our products are. But then these countries can start to make informed decisions. That they're not just having to go because we haven't got a lot of money, so we're going to grab this opportunity that's coming through. Because bottom line, it comes down to be an economic decision. So how do we change the economic equation and get out of trying to argue, is this technology more secure than that one? Let's go through and sell the technical benefits of this particular piece of technology because it's really good technology. I don't care about the other one. We can spend a lot of time arguing whether it's got vulnerabilities and everything else. I don't care. What I'm going to sell you is something that's a far superior product. And I think we can do that. And it gets it out of then and being a political discussion. Let's put it down to economics and opportunities for those countries. And because that sells rather than trying to argue that I think that product's bad. That's a losing proposition. We've tried to do that in Canada. We can't even do it in our country and it gets losing.
But if I can challenge a little bit, right? The difference is this is free, right? Obviously it comes with, a bag of false goods, but it's free. And for many states, and you've seen it particularly at the municipal level, where municipal leaders are calling on the Chinese for technology because at the state level, there's way too much politics and interference in being able to do it. And in many of these regions, if it's free, it's for me, right? So how do you balance against that? You're talking about selling and supporting. The Chinese are talking about, here you go.
No such thing as a free lunch. It's just in case you're going to pay, which hand you're going to pay out of. And I think what we can do is is put forward what that proposition of paying actually looks like, and gets back to what can the government be doing to actually incentivize businesses to go through and actually do that. So we start to make it reasonable. May not make it free, but we may be able to make it so attractive that we can compete with close to free and see what else comes out through that discussion. Because if you're just going to go against free and say, okay, that's the whole problem, then you're wasting your time going at it. But I think we can start to beat that game.
What do you think, Arturo?
What's the saying? If the product is free, you're the product, I think. So yeah, nothing is free. I would add on to that procurement frameworks. That's very important. If a central government is able to create the guardrails of what can be bought and what security measures the providers has to demonstrate, then they can prevent other entities of the country to buy things that could harm the citizens.
And I think just to complement that, I think implementing the security protocols across government level, because at the end of the day, if these protocols are implemented across government, like at the enterprise level, no matter what technology is plugged onto it, thinking about risk management frameworks is also critical. Because if it is that you have a certain type of technology and you know that it is not as secure, you won't be putting on certain data sets, you won't be putting on critical infrastructure onto those technologies. So I think that's one of the key considerations.
I think that's important. Now, thinking about, and again, if we have online questions or if we have questions in the audience, we'd happy to take those after this next set of questioning. And it's really, it's not a new issue, but it feels like it's an emerging issue, which is really the increase in mis and disinformation across the region, right? And a lot of this mis and disinformation is going through informal channels like WhatsApp, right? And the ability to exchange information through those kind of means. What can countries, what can industry do, if they can do anything, to really combat against this mis and disinformation without requiring all sorts of resources and active offices to do this? What are you seeing, particularly in the region, that might be able to help?
I can jump in that one really quick. We published in 2019 a document called Cybersecurity and Democratic Processes. We did that with our Department for Election Observation. And one of the things that we learned through that process was working with parliamentarians and Brazil's, for example, Elections Commission. And when they had a huge disinformation happening, they partnered with Facebook and WhatsApp. And one of the things that they try to do through those platforms is actually push and counter the data that's there. Many of them have established like a truth website, a website that can actually be fact-checked. And we believe that governments can follow examples such as that one. In Peru in 2019, when that whole disinformation was happening, they actually came to the OAS and say, hey, we need some neutral parties to be with us to actually monitor our technologies, monitor the electoral critical infrastructure, what's there. And we went with a team of neutral experts to just be there, just to ensure that anything that was happening, we could actually counter, not just with like facts, but ensuring that the data that was pushed came from authentic sources. I don't know.
Sure. So as a cloud service provider, we cannot see the customer's content. We don't see if they're using our platform to spread fake news. However, we have official channels where you can request or point out an abuse of our platform, and then we take action to remove it. But not being a social media company, it's hard to manage this type of misinformation.
I think the advice that's come out from the OAS is excellent, and it blends in nicely with what companies can do, because ultimately that's where the data is going to sit or transit through. But the other thing that I think governments can be doing, and Canada did a little bit of this during our last election, is we actually got before the election started, we got the government together, sit down and say, okay, we expect that this is going to happen. Now, how are we going to respond to it? Rather than sort of waiting until it happens and then trying to figure it out, let's plan it in advance. Let's get a committee together of people that everyone trusts, so deputy ministers or ministers, and how do we go through? And so when something happens, you're actually getting out in front of it rather than just spending forever trying to catch up, because catch up in that game is wasting time, because by the time you're trying to catch up, 10 or 20,000 people have already read it. So how do you get out in front of it? And that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. Let's say, I think the guidance from the OAS combined with what the technical companies can do, that's the way to do.
It's certainly an important question. We do have a question over here. Please identify yourself and ask the question.
Well, I speak loud enough. Oh, there you go. Hello, I'm Camila Castillo, a senior international relations. My question, I hear all the issues that you're all speaking about. They're all very important. And when you say that companies and people don't think that's a threat for them, I agree. I see it every day. I think it's an issue of trust. There's no trust. We don't know who to trust because of the issue of misinformation. So what can institutions and companies that work on cybersecurity do to gain the trust of governments and the civic people?
I think I could jump in. One of the key things I've seen over the years is information sharing. It's not to wait until an incident has happened to build a trust, because at that point, so many things are coming from so many different angles. So for example, being consistent with the type of data that you give all the time, it's providing it with a consistent basis, providing it with the ability to actually digest the information. Two quick examples. The OAS has an agreement right now with Microsoft for a certain type of data set that has to be given on a non-commercial level. It can't be sold, can't be anything. And what we've been doing is actually having a training today, teaching our member states that when this data is pushed to you, how do you use this data? We say to them, it's not for you to sit as a government with the data. It's to recognize that the companies and institutions that have this, you're getting this for free, pass it on for free. Ensure that you start to say to the companies that we know what's happening to you. So at the end, when you start putting in security protocols, security standards, security measures, the need for MISP, which is a malware information sharing platform, the trust has already been built because they've been seeing consistency. So I think the word I would probably just say is just information sharing and consistently.
Bob, you wanted to get in here?
Yeah, cybersecurity at its basic is a trust issue. You're absolutely correct. And trust is people to people. So corporations, when we talk about sharing information, for example, or countries, that's really tough because it comes down to the individual saying, when I share this, is my company going to protect me or going to be mad at me because I do it? So one of the things that we deliberately set up in my organization is that we're not just looking at sharing cyber threat information. Collaboration is the huge piece. So you get people sitting down and talking about things that are not sensitive. So, I've got this little problem here. Has anybody else had that problem? And can you give me some advice on it? Or I'm about to implement this particular procedure, or I'm going to introduce this new technology or this new software. Has anybody done it? And what happens? And what happens through that dialogue, you and I are sitting and talking about it. I'm benefiting from it. You're benefiting from it. And what happens is we realize our conversation didn't actually appear on the front page of the paper tomorrow. Not only that, I went back and I told my boss, I've now solved this problem that I thought was going to take me a long time to do. I've now had a whole bunch of other people sit and give me some advice. All of a sudden, my trust and your trust start to go up. And we start to build it like that. And we're starting to see the results of it in our organization where we deliver, it's taken years. This is not something you're going to do overnight. Somebody doesn't come along and decree it. But I think when we start getting people involved in it, you start to build that trust up. And that's how it'll go. It happens between countries. That's why ambassadors get together to know one another. It's not the governments that are sharing it. It's two ambassadors. It's two individuals within the organization. It's two technical people within a company sharing information. And that's how we can make it happen. This is a people business. I go back to what are the three things in security? It's people, the technology, and the process. And let's go after the people side because that's how we'll solve that problem. And it works. You can make it happen.
Fantastic. Let's take the next two questions. I'm going to throw this first one to you. So we can go here and then over to Camila.
Hello, good afternoon. Maria Fuensanta, also from Panama. I'm a former president of the Small Business Association in Panama and also vice president of the Central America Small Business Association. So I thanks a lot to Mr. Bob Cardon to bring the subject here. We have to remember that 90% approximately of all the business in our region are small businesses, and they provide from 45% to 70% of the employment. And they have been the main target from the pandemic. I mean, they are the real affected one. We are now listening to this subject and listening to the previous former speaker that talking about entrepreneurship and the interest to foster new startups and everything as one of the major aids or solutions for our threatened economies right now after pandemic. I want to rescue that idea of technology savvy and healthy SSB or small business and we call it, or PYMEs, as we call it in Latin America, as the real guardians for democracy, for a model of free competence. And I do believe in foster unicorns and everything. That's good. I work with right now with a lot of entrepreneurs in the university and voluntary. But the real thing is that we have small businesses that are the base for employment and for economic health in our region. So the OAS, or give some specific example of a program. You are working with Amazon, with Cisco, with City Foundation, but do you have any particular program going on specifically for PYMEs? Or do you have any successful aid program or assistance for PYMEs right now? Is that in the top of the line right now? Just a question.
Take Camilo's question as well, and then we'll go around the horn.
Thank you for your insightful ideas. My name is Camilo Laya. I'm a PhD student in political science, and I work at the Jack Gordon Institute in professional education. So my question is regarding in terms of timing and leadership. What do you think is the leadership needed to face all of those indicators that you show on cybersecurity? What do you think could be like the proper answer to create a response to all of those indicators and in Latin America, what the students and professionals could do to face those challenges that you mentioned? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go Arturo, Bob, and then Kerry-Ann. We have the two questions, one on the small businesses support, what assets are out there, and what are we doing there? And then the second one was on the role of leadership to be able to combat. So Arturo.
Sure. So yeah, for us, it's part of the strategy to help what we call SMEs or pymes or MIPYMEs. The programs we have, let's say for countries, sometimes we have this small cyber cluster or we call it cybersecurity organizations where we provide content, free training, sometimes even credit. But I would say that the examples that I have in the region are MIPYMEs that for the first time had access to technology that normally has been forbidden by the cost. Let's say like technology that will help them prevent cyber attacks using machine learning in cloud service providers such as AWS, but also their competitors. We don't charge by the whole product. We only charge by the moment they use it, normally by minutes. That reduces the cost dramatically. So right now, MIPYMEs that has 5 people or 5-10 people in the organization can have access to this type of technology that they didn't even have previously. And also, we also provide free tier, we call it, so they can have access to 1 year free of many of the services so they can start building. And one of the examples I really like, it's from the government of Guatemala, where this small set of programmers, I think there were 3 programmers, over a weekend, they created using this free tier, what it became the one of the biggest software, I'm trying to remember the name, of the government of Guatemala. They built it by themselves using just this free tier. And once you give the tools to programmers, to developers, it's amazing what they can do. Again, technology such as cloud service help to democratize and get access to this program. Should I answer the second question?
If you'd like, yeah.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, leaders are key. They are who are going to bring the strategy in the organizations, in their governments. So we also have programs to teach leaders the importance of bringing technology in their respective organizations. With them, we have an executive program where we bring them to, last year was UK, so they can learn from UK what they have done for the past 15 years, and they can bring them back to their country. I don't know if that answered that question.
Thank you. Bob?
I mean, as you say, small business is what drives everything. And within our organization, we specifically run programs for small businesses. We make it really, really cheap for them to participate. I tell small law firms it's less than what you would pay for a client lunch a year to join. And the advantage of that is it gives them an opportunity to sit with people who have got, think of some of the big banks that spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars every year on cybersecurity. They're quite willing to share their expertise with small businesses. 2 reasons. One is small businesses are their customers and clients, so they've got a self-interest, but also to keep the economy running. So there's ways for the small business community to actually participate actively with large companies if you're just getting together and organize amongst themselves. Essentially, that's what we ended up doing. And we actually have a small business committee within our organization to make sure that the products and services we deliver are suitable for the small 2, 3, 4, 5-person company, because I've got a grocery chain that belongs to us or belong within our organization. They have the same number of employees as the entire Canadian federal government. So I've got a company that's got 230,000 employees, and I've got a little 30-person construction company. And we want to make sure that we can provide services for both of them. And surprisingly, the small companies are really getting a lot of benefit out of it. And the other thing is the small companies are starting to, within the committee, we thought it was going to be providing advice, to everybody else or questions, make sure you give us this. What's happening is the small businesses are starting to realize, wow, they can actually share information, collaborate amongst themselves because the problems are the same. They're talking the same language, the scale is the same. So they can do a lot of that. And again, cost is effectively not there to be able to do. So I think the private sector's got an opportunity to step forward, and we didn't wait for government. This was all done by the private sector. Government participates afterwards, but the whole idea came from the private sector. So I'm really encouraged because I think there's a lot of, we talk about the small business community being the drivers of innovation within our economies. Well, they can be the drivers of innovation in cybersecurity as well. This is just one more challenge for them to go after. They've got the ability to do it. They do it every single day. Cyber is just one more place I think where they can do it. And we're certainly seeing the results of that in Canada.
Thanks, Bob.
I think what I was just trying to check the name. There's actually an inter-American dialogue of high-level PSME authorities. And as a part of that, just generally, we have pretty much a forum in which you can actually talk about development for small and micro enterprises. Within the cybersecurity program, one of the white papers that we developed just a few years ago, and I'll find a link and I can share it with you, focuses on the tools and the things that small and micro enterprises can do to make themselves more cyber sure. Another thing that we've done within the cybersecurity program is ensure that through some of our partners, for example, Cisco during the pandemic, when COVID-19 hit and a lot of the smaller micro enterprises didn't know what to do to pivot for security, we actually offered a free course that they could have gotten certifications during COVID and actually had the tools needed to digitize and protect the services that they were adopting. Specifically, we do not have a program that says, okay, it's for PMEs generally. But what we do as a part of our leverage as the OAS, when we have national cybersecurity strategy development, we as a regional body, we open the door to them to be at the table. So one of the things we would say to our governments is, if we're going to do a national strategy, these small businesses need to be at the table, and usually comes through either an association of businesses represented by civil society, and PMEs is one of the things that we advocate for very, very, very strongly during those consultations. And I hope that answers. And to Camila's question, in terms of leadership, it's one of the things that cybersecurity fails without it. That's a short answer. For most of the countries that have been successful, it's actually either someone within the presidency or someone within the prime minister's office or someone who has a very strong voice as a minister that could advocate for it, because otherwise all the efforts that have happened, I've seen so many times where we've started processes in countries, and when the administration changes, it dies because there's no consistent leader that says that this is something that is not tied to administration, it's tied to a national development. What we've done to advocate it, two quick examples from many of the strategies that we do. If we're doing a document, we actually encourage, because we can't tell them what to do, but we encourage our member states to invite the opposition to the table. And for us, that shows true leadership, because if it is that you have a document and you invite the opposition to comment on it, and they say, yeah, it's fine, if there's an election coming up and they come into power, oftentimes they don't turn their back on it. And we've been working, for example, right now with Ecuador on a similar issue. We've done Mexico in the past, Colombia, Jamaica, and it's been something that has been very, very successful to encourage that level of leadership that goes beyond partisan lines.
Bob, final word.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I could add is we've looked for different kinds of ways to put leaders out there to actually represent what needs to happen. So for example, within Canada is an organization called the Business Council of Canada. It's an association of about 150, 160 CEOs from some of the biggest companies in the country. And they've taken on cybersecurity as one of the things that they've got to be doing, and they realize the benefit of that, and speaking on behalf of the entire business community. So you've got leadership like that that's going out and engaging the political level. They met with the Prime Minister recently. We've engaged with the chambers of commerce across the country. So it's representing down at the grassroots level, and you can start. That organization represents, I think, about 240,000 companies that participate in that. So you can start to get this mass of an organization or organizations that can go forward and start to put that leadership together to both represent the private sector, what it needs, and as a place for the government to be interacting, because the government trusts those organizations to be providing sort of neutral advice coming into it, that an individual company would just have a really difficult time being able to, and quite frankly, a small company or business is in the business of making widgets. That's what they do. They're not in the business of trying to go through and spending a lot of time, researching some of these policy things. So grab on to some of those organizations that have got the time, got the resources, and have the ongoing access and understanding of how the political machine works to get in and influence what's going on.
Well, thank you. It's been an extremely informative discussion, and I know our partners on the online Zoom web have been engaged. So Bob, Arturo, Kerry-Ann, thank you so much. And I turn it over to Brian.
So this is the hardcore audience. This is the audience that makes it all the way through, those that are in here, and of course, those that are still online with us. Grateful that you're still with us. Shout out to Randy for some exceptional moderating, and of course, the panelists on what I expect to be an increasing conversation, in terms of security in the region. There's no doubt that the cyber threat is surging rapidly because of the number of devices connected online in combination with the proliferation of know-how. And so you're going to see a lot more cyber in the future discussions around security. To sort of close us out with some closing remarks, and of course, we're incredibly humbled by the support that we received from the Canadian consulate here in Miami. And to have us to close out, I'd like to invite Consul General Susan Harper to join us for a few words in closing. I almost feel like she is a part of FIU. She deserves to be on the faculty, at least. She's been here so often. And again, extensive career in foreign service, and further illustrates the commitment that Canada has in international affairs. And so with that, Consul General, I'd like to welcome you up to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. And for those of you who are in the room and also have had to deal with Miami traffic, you'll know why I'm here and not Eric Walsh, who had to make sure that he got to his plane to go to his next visit. So I'm here still to signal from the Government of Canada how important we think our participation is today. And that's for three reasons. First of all, we certainly love working with Brian and Randy and other people here at FIU. And in this Hemispheric Security Conference, we think it's particularly important. Although I'm a trade person and in my roots in the Foreign Service, I'm also the lead for all our consuls general in the United States on security and defense, because it is so fundamentally important. And it relates totally to the commercial economic elements. You have to have both together. And so from our point of view, it's really a great opportunity to participate again this year in this conference. Secondly, and it certainly was emphasized in the panel, and I'm sure in some of the other panels too, and you can see it here by looking at all these flags, we cannot do this alone. You need to have partners, you need to have allies, and that is how we are going to go forward on this. And I think some of Bob Gordon's points about that's not just nation to nation, it's person to person. And that's why we're here in person today, moving our way out of COVID, because that's really important to build the links that we do need to have in security and defense. And third, cybercrime is so fundamentally important. I would say both on the commercial and non-commercial security and defense side, right now, this is probably the #1 topic that partners in Florida are asking us to bring in Canadian expertise on. And we're very lucky to get Bob Gordon for this event, and I recognize that. I think part of that is there's recognition that Canada is dealing with this, but we're all looking for partners because this is so fundamentally important. It's the two-edged sword. And in fact, our department, the Foreign Ministry of Canada, we've had cybersecurity issues. We had one major one at the beginning of this year. And so we recognize we are all vulnerable. We have to keep working hard and understanding the issues and supporting each other. And this is a particularly important subject in the context of discussing security and defense with our partners. So we were very pleased to be able to bring Bob Gordon to help sponsor this panel and to support another great annual conference for FIU on security and defense. So thank you very much.
Thank you, future FIU Professor Susan Harper, for those remarks. So, okay, this Randy kicked us off this morning. I'll close this out just by thanking you for being here this late into the afternoon. I will sort of tease that we have an exceptional lineup tomorrow. President Solis will kick us off in the morning with some welcome remarks, and then we're going to go into a keynote address by the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Dan Erickson, who was appointed in the Biden administration to lead the U.S. Department of Defense efforts to engage and build relationships in Latin America and the Caribbean. After that, we'll have a conversation on the future of the armed forces in Latin America. That conversation is going to be led by Dr. Barbara Fick at the U.S. Army War College, and it's going to include an array of professional military officers from Latin America, including one who just left U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Craig Fowler, who is a senior fellow here at Florida International University. And then sort of closing off the morning, we'll have a panel on sort of the geopolitical interests in the Venezuela context. And so we'll explore China, Russia, others that are on the ground active in Venezuela, what that means vis-a-vis U.S. national interest, broader global security. And so Dr. Eduardo Gomar will moderate that discussion. And so that's the lineup for tomorrow. And thereafter, we have another exciting panel on Thursday. And then we'll round out Friday talking about the intersection of democracy and security with another group of esteemed intellectuals on the subject. So with that, this concludes. I'm trying to make sure we're on time. I got 1 minute. Okay, all right. He said we got 1 minute, but we're going to give that minute back to you. Not that it matters, but here you go. We're going to end early. So thank you all again for a wonderful day one to this year's Hemispheric Security Conference.